we've got Melissa Marsden talking about collaborative workspace design.
I'm the Chief Creative here at Marsden Collective, and we're actually one of the Business Depot Collective members, and we actually reside at the back here. I'm going to have a chat to you today about workplace design and collaboration and how that works from changing behaviours and creating inclusive leadership. So we are a workplace strategy company and interior design firm. So what that means is, the workplace strategists, we go and work with our clients to understand their business, understand their people, how they work, how they communicate. We also want to understand the business's strategy and then how that all fits together. So we then go about creating a workplace environment that supports all of that to happen. So this gives you a bit of an understanding about some of those ideas and how that actually comes together. So whilst I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm extremely fascinated by this. Mirror neurons, spindle neurons, I have no idea what all of those things are, but they are very important to our brains. So neurogenesis is about the creation of new dendrites and new neurons, and these form new neural nets and essentially create chunks of new brain. So effectively we're actually building new brain through this whole process. Now, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Fiona Kerr last year at a conference, and what she started to see was that charismatic managers and their staff start to grow the same maps of neural information, and it creates an internally matched view of ideas and aims. So why this really excited me was because I've been doing this for a really long time now, well, to me anyway, and what I started to see from what she was telling me from a scientific perspective actually started to underpin all of the things that I had been doing for a really long time. So I now had this scientific data that actually explained what I had been observing and actually naturally doing as a designer in my role. So what this implies is, you know that old saying of having everyone on the same page? Well, they've actually now got scientific proof that when you have managers working in these environments, everyone is actually growing those same neural nets. So through brain imaging, they have seen that the manager and their team are actually all having the same neurological reaction and the maps are the same. And the way this is happening is that what she started to do was look at her PhD on why these people make better leaders. And what she found was that these people have a really rich metacognitive skills, and these are then transferred into the people that they lead. And that's through trust, a shared purpose, and the infrastructure to get their job done. This also allows them to lead and discover and learn in their workplace environment. So having these shared environments and these shared thoughts enables them to have these roadmaps that they're all matching and mirroring. And so the brain imaging has started to be able to reflect that and show that that's happening. Now you might be wondering why as a designer this interests me so much. Well, as I said, this sort of starts to underpin what we do. And so as designers, we want to understand how our businesses that we're working with work. And so this started to give me some background and started to give me some context into terms of what I was doing and how that was actually influencing these businesses that we were working with. And I think that's really important when we're actually shaping and changing the organisations that we're actually facilitating. So part of that is neurogenesis, and it's about creating new brain through connected teams. Now, this is actually something that John just said about eyeballing people, and there's actually scientific data that supports that. So by having face-to-face interactions, we're actually creating a new bit of brain. And this happens through what they call a retinal eye lock. And so when we meet face-to-face, there is a process where our retinas actually lock onto each other. And what happens is a new bit of brain is created, and there is a chemical reaction that sits in the brain that remembers this. And so this doesn't happen over Skype. So these whole disconnected workforces and the ability to work over Skype and technology does not replace this. However, if we have met and we've had this chemical reaction and our retinas have locked, the brain remembers that. So if you do have a Skype interaction with someone later on, you remember that chemical reaction, you remember how you felt talking to that person, and your brain brings that back to the surface. But you can't create it initially. It has to be done face-to-face originally. So when we start to look at that from a neurogenesis point of view in terms of active workplace environments, what we start to see is that our brain is actually creating new brain when we are physically moving. So creating active workplace environments is actually going to start to stimulate the brain and create new brain. And that starts to happen through establishing trust, empathy and humour. It starts to lower our resistance to new ideas, so we're going to be much more open to what's happening around us and taking on new concepts. We're going to be more information is going to be absorbed, so we're going to actually retain more information in these types of environments. We're going to have more nimble responses, so we're going to be much more agile and active in terms of our thinking. We're going to have higher levels of creativity and innovation. Who doesn't want that? And we're going to have a perceived fairness, which opens up people's behaviours. So we're going to see behaviours are starting to change by the fact that we've got these active workplace environments and we're encouraging people to move around and their brains are being built and challenged. Have you ever wondered why you have those amazing brainwaves in the shower? What's happening is when you're in those daydreaming spaces, you're allowing the brain to wander and abstract thoughts are starting to come in and they're starting to connect. So this doesn't happen when you're sitting in front of your computer or you're trying to force it to happen. It's a random psychological response where these parts of your brain start to build new paths and they start to connect, and then you have these amazing miracle ideas that come. So daydreaming is actually a really good part of actually being creative and innovative. So building those types of spaces into your workplace is actually going to be far beneficial for your organisation. So when we start to look at how that works in terms of an active workplace environment, we need to start looking at different spaces for different activities. So we need quiet spaces. So these quiet spaces are where we can concentrate, we can work alone, or we can work with others. We need collaborative spaces so that we can go and brainstorm, create and work with others. We need standing spaces to get us active so we can sit and stand and move around. We need lounging spaces so we can relax, we can read, or we can work informally with other people. And we need bump spaces. So these are the spaces that create interaction with other employees. Where can we meet and interact informally that we probably wouldn't interact with those people otherwise? So what do we start to see is that these spaces are starting to facilitate and inhibit varying needs for communication, information sharing and collaboration. They influence our interaction, our privacy and our quiet reflection. So the way that we put our workplaces together is actually going to influence how these people operate and communicate and work within them. So the important part of that is about looking at a hybrid infrastructure. So with technology changing, that's going to have a big impact. So as the quote on the screen says, influencing behaviour is almost all of what management is about. And buildings influence behaviour. So if we want to change the way that our people are behaving, we need to change the environments in which they're working. So the way that we see that starting to happen is we need to start paying attention to the proximity of people and spaces to each other. So if we were working in an open plan environment, how close is it to the local quiet room so that I can escape to have a private phone call? Or if a heated discussion with someone else is happening, where can I move that to? Or if we're having a collaboration discussion, it starts to get a bit rowdy for that workplace environment, where can we move to a more collaborative environment? All of those things need to be quite closely located so we've got somewhere to move to easily. The style of these spaces is also really important. Their soft environment and their technological tools. Have they got the right furniture? Are they facilitating the right kind of conversation? Do they have the right technology to enable me to actually have this conversation? And the building and the layout of the physical environment is actually really important as well. How does Department A communicate with Department B? How is that communication flow being inhibited or enhanced? All of these things are actually contributed to and influenced by the workplace environment that we're creating. So this has a really big bearing on the process of innovation and creativity. The other thing that we start to see is the diversity of thinking and the similarity attraction bias, which actually starts to consider the preferred way of thinking. So there's actually 6 preferred ways of thinking. We've got an outcomes, options, processes, people, evidence and risk. What the research has shown is that 75% of leaders are options and outcomes focused, and only 3% of people actually look at or care about evidence and risk. So if you've got a bunch of leaders sitting around a boardroom table and they're making a whole heap of decisions, most of them are going to be around options and outcomes. And the other 4 factors are going to get ignored. What Barack Obama does is when he needs to make a decision, he goes around the table of his whole room and he asks everyone their opinion before he actually makes a decision. So that way he's actually getting a diversity of thinking, covering all of his bases, and he can make an informed and sensible decision that has considered all of those aspects. So as designers, we can actually start to influence this diversity of thinking through the spaces that we're creating. And by creating opportunities for people to come together that they wouldn't normally consider themselves to be communicating with. So bringing person A and person B together, they might not sit together, they might not be in the same department, but to have an informal conversation, it starts to change the way that they think. we've got all of that opportunity in terms of how we create our space. It's that whole process of serendipity. So if we start to talk about inclusive leadership and how that starts to change our behaviour through the physical environment, there's a really great example in this one. So we went to a conference recently, and this was another design firm, and they did a bit of an experiment. They spoke to all of their staff and they asked them about what is the space that makes them feel the most comfortable. Where do they feel like their most authentic selves? Where do they feel the most at home? And the resounding response was in their kitchen. And so what they decided to do with their workplace environment was to actually go and build the kitchen as the first thing that you saw when you walked in the door. So they did away with the reception desk, and the first thing that you walked into was the kitchen. It's actually not that dissimilar to what's happening here at Business Depot. We have the reception, but we have the kitchen very closely aligned. And what they started to find is that they would have their stand-up meetings in the kitchen, and that was where they would do all their workplace environments, and they would have all of their meetings would happen there. Within 3 months, they were starting to produce different work. So what had happened was that they were bringing their outside self to work, and they were starting to create different solutions. Their clients no longer saw them as designers, but they started to see them as problem solvers. They started to build relationships with their clients. They started to have partnerships with their clients. What started to happen was that their clients were actually coming and meeting other clients in that kitchen, and that there was this communication crossover, to the point where they actually formalised it, and they were actually booking meetings prior and to after their meetings with that particular design firm so that they could introduce and connect other clients to each other. What happened was that these clients would come and hang out, and then they started to have these overlaps. So what had happened with this whole kitchen space, through the physical environment, they had changed the signposts for how their staff were able to behave in that space. So changing behaviour can simply be about how we change our physical environment. What they also found was that the junior staff now felt confident enough to voice their opinions, and they started to bring things to the table. And that changed the dynamic of the organisation as well. And what they started to see was that the human hierarchy started to be broken down. So they really changed the whole face of SME space. They were bringing their authentic selves to work, and they started to really think differently, and they were engaging with their clients differently, all because they changed how their workplace environment looked. The other thing that we need to think about is how communication is changed through proximity. So in 1970, Thomas Allen developed the Allen curve. And basically what it tells us is that the closer we sit together, the more we're going to communicate. So if you sit more than 50 metres away from somebody, your communication with that person will drop to 0 times per week. If you want to have less emails from someone, move your chair 7 metres closer. You'd think that technology would actually have changed this, but in 2006 they repeated this. So originally done in 1970, in 2006 they repeated it, same result. Because people like to talk to people. So what we found, and you'll be familiar with Yahoo and how they so decided that no one should work from home, that everyone had to come into the office, it's all around this. Ideas don't happen when people are communicating through technology. That communication and that face-to-face interaction all needs to happen in a centralised location. What we are seeing is that workplace environments are starting to shift from a workplace to a social space. You can work anywhere through technology, but you can't communicate physically with somebody else in a random environment on a technology. Cisco, this is their office here. You can see how they've actually activated their corridors. They've put brainstorming benches, couches, whiteboard walls, blackboard walls there, so that that whole serendipitous action of meeting someone in a corridor, you can then have that brainwave and then start to communicate that on the wall and continue that conversation. What we also start to see is that people are starting to look at towards self-organising office environments. So what this means is, taking the Mythbusters example, they did a bit of an experiment here, and they looked at the 4-way stop sign, the traffic cop and the roundabout. And what we found here is that the 4-way stop sign was a bit clunky. The traffic cop, he's making all those decisions. And then you've got the roundabout. And the reality of this whole experiment was that the roundabout was the fastest and the most efficient process of getting 460 cars through there in 15 minutes. So it's about intuitive design, allowing people to self-organise, and that the decision-making of a single individual is not as efficient or quicker than that of multiple individuals. So having an intuitive, self-organising environment and entrusting your people to be able to manage that. So if we just have a look at those range of spaces again, we've got quiet, collaborative, standing, lounging and bump. And what we need to start to look at is how the task or activity-specific spaces enables people to move to these spaces to support their physical, emotional and productivity needs. So if we have a quick look at a case study of a project we completed, this is iSeek. They're an enterprise-class data company, and they wanted to future-proof their organisation. So we started to bring those spaces into their organisation. So here's an example of what their quiet space looked like, their collaboration space, their standing spaces, so sit-to-stand electronic workstations, their lounging spaces, so we had soft lounging, workspaces, variety of different options there, and their bump space. So this is their kitchen where they funneled everyone into, and everything happened in this kitchen. We went back 6 months later and we did a survey of how the staff were actually finding that environment. And what we found that 50% of their people said that their relationships in the organisation had greatly to significantly enhanced in the new environment. 63% said they were more collaborative. 68% said that their job satisfaction had increased. 87 people said that they were happy to extremely happy in the new workplace. And 58% said that they were more productive. That worked really well. So we also did this with another organisation, and we went back there 6 months later, and what we found was that their sick leave had gone down by 45%. That their staff retention had also gone down by 60%. So their staff turnover had gone down by 60%. And substantially too, their electricity costs had gone down by 25%. So by actually looking at the types of environments that we're creating, we can change the behaviours of our people in those organisations. We can make them more collaborative, we can make the inclusive more leadership, and we can start to change people's behaviours, how we design our physical environments.